This guy comes to the clinic. He has left joint pain, had a couple of lavages, failed splints, a root canal on 18 twice because it's still hurting him. It's still hurting him. In this, it doesn't touch. It's not in occlusion at all as he's clenching because 18's been shaved way down. They figured that was the problem. Still hurts him. Chronic headache, stiff and sore neck, and frequent migraine. And I go, okay, well, you came to the right guy because watch what I'm going to make for you. And he pulls out this glow-in-the-dark box. Goes, so I had him move excursively, and now he starts getting contact here in this excursive position. So you need an NTI device to disclude these teeth and have incisal contact in excursive. So he put his in. Some guy made one from scratch. He's still contacting over there. So this condition did whatever it took to make that dentist look bad, because I know the guy who made that. He's really good at what he does, and he couldn't figure it out because he didn't ask the patient to do something really weird, because your symptoms are really weird. So I go, okay, that makes sense. You've got left joint pain because this condyle right now is very translated, and he's clenching on the same side. It's getting clobbered. I think that's the tooth he had the root canal on. I might have that mixed up. Anyway, the point was I've got to eliminate that contact, that coupling, that circuitry in that position. So when I shaved down that cusp, his jaw went even farther because I unanchored him. Woo, he kept on going. I don't care anymore. Although that's weird to go way over there, it's not as pathologic as having the post coupling back here that allows the temporalis to go full gear and plow into his joint and make his neck and his sinuses, all that stuff. So now when I look back, I said, if you were a person who went like this and had posterior contact and squeezed really hard, what would you need? A root canal on that molar because it would kill you. Your sinuses would be wiped out because as the lateral pterygoid pulls this way, guess what? It's also pulling that way on the pterygoid plate of the sphenical bone. So muscles really get short like this way. Only because one side is stable does it look like it does this. It doesn't really. It's doing this. So now it's pulling the condyle this way and the pterygoid plate that way. So the sinuses are always stiff and sore, a couple of root canals, constant headache. You clench like this, plan on your neck being sore. It's a great way to maintain, to fill your bucket totally full to get frequent migraines. Someone says, no, you can't use an NTI because it distalizes the condyle. It does. A piece of plastic will distalize your condyle. If all you do is hang out with articulators and you drop the incisal guide pin after elevating the maxilla, the guide pin scoots down the plate and the whole maxilla goes forward and it looks like the condyle is going to the back of the joint. If all you did was articulation, you grabbed that pin and you bonked it and you drop the pin because it's an NTI. You drop the incisal guide pin, you think your condyle goes backwards and you distalize a condyle. If you held your articulator the way you're supposed to, and your mandible elevates and your guide pin hits this plate, the force of the musculature always goes in this. You cannot change the vector force of the fibers. You can't do it. So it's always going to be total that direction. So if anything, that pin would get clobbered because of the angle of this as it hits the pin. I'll show you how it happens in real life. So where does this idea originate from? So if you look at Jeff Oakeson's textbook on how to make the proper flat plane occlusal stabilizing splint, you start with a maxillary suck down and you put a little anterior blob on the front end of that splint. And you make sure you make that little anterior discluting element, that little blob, perpendicular with the long axis of the tooth. You have the patient close, tap, tap, tap. It, quote, relaxes the muscles. Doesn't relax them. It prevents them from achieving pathologic intensity. But he says, beware. If your little blob is angled inappropriately when the patient goes to close, it will deflect the mandible up and back. See, when you drop the maxilla and the pin, it deflects down that guide pin ramp. There is no elevation and deflect and go backwards. The musculature doesn't work that way. This is not a ping pong ball rattling around in there. So the warning is a distal incline will deflect the mandible backwards and make that joint hurt. You'll distalize the condyle. What really happens is if you have the patient tap, tap, tap on that, it bothers their incisor instantly. Ah! And they go, ah, ah. They'll pull their mandible backwards so they don't bang into that. So they call that distalizing the mandible. Or like that guy back there. If you have an NTI device where the discluting element is angled improperly, they do not come back with a distalized condyle. They come back and their incisor is so sore, they go, I'm never wearing this piece of trash again. My tooth is killing me. Change the angulation, they bite and go, oh yeah, it doesn't hurt anymore, okay. Same thing if you angle it the other way, your mandible does not deflect forward. If anything, that incisor gets pushed forward in its socket. That's what really happens. If you have someone wear this thing overnight, it's their incisor that hurts, not their joint. So what extremes might someone go through? This is really what you're thinking of when you're treating somebody. Here's their flat plane splint. Sometimes they call this, you have a hypermobile mandible. Not when you're chewing food. You know, if they do things like this, you're going to get these really weird presentations. So you're thinking, if someone's going to go forward like that and squeeze, what are you going to do? You always go back to the basics. You need minimal contraction intensity and minimal condylar rotation during the occluding event. Right now, that is not minimal contraction intensity. You still have to beat that one first before you get into rotation business. That's the goal, to get minimal contraction intensity. They're going to be out there anyway. And once they get out there, this is the weird things that they do. You can't take a maxillary splint and have it anticipate this protrusion because it looks pretty weird. You can't have them, that thing can't enter the room before they do. So you make a mandibular splint, and people with mandibular splints go forward and they end up clenching their bicuspids and first molars into the lower splint. You're still kind of stuck. Here's someone, either they were class 3 or they've become that way, and here's some intense anterior clenching. And Steve almost practices in my town, and so he sees my failures and I see his. And I call him up, I saw one of yours, I saw one of yours. So Steve likes to make something like this. It's sort of going to guide the mandible forward when the guy goes to clench. This kind of creeps me out because I think when mandibles go forward, they've got to get pulled backward, and I think of that as what flares lower anteriors forward. But anyway, so he clenches ideally on that platform with his incisors. But he was in the pain clinic at the neurology clinic.
Does he do that for sleep?
Yeah, that's for sleep.
That's okay.
Yeah. So the idea is a little bit of mandibular advancement, maybe maintain some airway.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Because when the mandible goes forward, clenching intensity is even less intense. It's a sneaky trick. But this guy had one thing that we didn't want to look for, because he could clench like that easily. That was easy for him to do. So I said, okay, put your device in and do that. So this doesn't show. Here he's way out in front of it, but the molars are clenching on the device back there. So I'm the NTI guy, but why bother? I had some acrylic, so I just put a little extension on the discluting element because I know he's going to go out there. So that's what he wears now. Now he hits it when he moves forward, he's on when he moves back, and he's fine. But I had to assume this guy's doing something really weird. He was already sort of protruded anyway because of the device. Why wouldn't he just go farther forward? So here's a lower splint, and we can still clench on it. Another way to do it is if you make this NTI device on the lower and the patient protrudes, unlike having an upper device where you'd have that big old goofy discluting element hanging out there, you could put a hanger on stuff. With a lower device now, when the patient protrudes, you can get incisal edge contact.